to leave. Now.
What? I'm just having coffee.
Manager says you're making people uncomfortable. You're trespassing.
This coffee 10 minutes ago. I'm not bothering anyone.
Are you leaving or do I need to remove you?
You're making a mistake. FBI, special agent.
The body cam is already recording when the patrol car door opens. The lens catches the late afternoon light spilling across a quiet cafe patio. People are seated with laptops and paper cups, unaware that the next few minutes will later be reviewed frame by supervisors, attorneys, and eventually a jury. The officer approaches without urgency, posture upright, voice controlled. According to the footage, there is no visible disturbance, no raised voices, no reported crime. The encounter begins not with a warning or a citation, but with a directive. The man seated at the table needs to leave. What the camera does not yet reveal, but what the title already locks in, is the identity of the person being addressed. He is not a civilian unfamiliar with police authority. He is a black FBI agent. Years before this moment, according to official records tied to his career, this man operated within the same legal system the officer now represents on the street. He enforced federal statutes. He participated in investigations that required strict adherence to constitutional limits. He worked cases where improper detentions, unlawful searches, and authority overreach were not abstract concepts, but grounds for suppression, discipline, or liability. Those actions performed in conference rooms and court filings, not on sidewalks, are part of his professional record. None of that is visible to the officer in real time. The footage shows a different dynamic. A uniformed local cop exercising immediate control over a public space, and a seated individual calmly asking why he is being detained. According to the bodycam audio, the explanation does not clarify the legal basis. The directive stands: leave the cafe. This is the first point of dramatic irony. The officer is asserting authority over someone whose past work involved evaluating whether that same authority was lawfully exercised. The camera captures the imbalance without commentary. No one raises their voice. No one mentions race. No one references federal credentials, at least not yet. The situation escalates not through force, but through insistence. According to the footage, the officer treats the refusal to immediately comply as justification to detain. The word detained is used before any clear articulation of reasonable suspicion appears on the recording. Chairs scrape lightly as patrons shift their attention. Phones remain down. The scene stays quiet. What follows will not end at the cafe. The title makes that clear. This detention, captured in high definition, time-stamped, and preserved, will later be examined by people far removed from this patio. City attorneys will watch the same footage. Review boards will slow it down. A dollar figure will eventually be attached to these minutes. But at this moment, none of that is visible. The officer believes this is a routine exercise of control. The man being detained knows how such encounters are judged after the fact. The camera keeps recording. The body cam does not capture the agent's resume. It does not display credentials, training records, or years of federal service. What it records instead is demeanor, measured, composed, deliberate. According to the footage, the man does not raise his voice. He does not attempt to leave abruptly. He asks questions that are narrow and precise. Am I being detained? For what reason? These are not the questions of someone unfamiliar with police procedure. They are structured, they are legally anchored, and they immediately create a gap between what the officer appears to believe is happening and what the situation actually is. The title establishes that the man is a black FBI agent. That fact alone carries specific legal implications. FBI agents are sworn federal law enforcement officers. Their authority derives from federal statute. Their training includes constitutional law, detention standards, and use of force doctrine. According to publicly available information about FBI operational requirements, agents are trained to recognize when a stop crosses from consensual interaction into detention and when an officer must articulate reasonable suspicion. None of that training is referenced out loud at the cafe. The agent does not identify himself immediately. According to the footage, he continues to ask for the basis of the detention. The officer's response does not cite a specific crime. Instead, the justification shifts toward compliance. He is being told to leave, and he has not done so quickly enough. This is where legitimacy becomes central. From a legal perspective, presence in a public cafe is lawful. Sitting at a table, drinking coffee, and using a laptop are not criminal acts. The Fourth Amendment requires that a detention be supported by reasonable suspicion that a crime has occurred, is occurring, or is about to occur. According to the Bodycam, no such suspicion is clearly articulated at this stage. The officer's commands continue. The agent remains seated, hands visible, posture unchanged. He asks again whether he is legally required to leave. The question is calm, but it forces a legal threshold. Either the encounter is consensual, in which case refusal is permitted, or it is a detention, which requires justification. The footage shows hesitation. The officer repeats the order rather than clarifying the basis. This repetition widens the legitimacy gap, the difference between what the officer assumes he can require and what the law actually allows. At this point, the agent identifies himself as a federal officer. The disclosure is not theatrical. According to the audio, it is stated plainly. No badge is waved. No authority is asserted beyond the statement itself. The reaction is immediate, but not corrective. The officer does not disengage. He does not step back to reassess the legal footing of the stop. Instead, according to the footage, he treats the identification as irrelevant to the command already given. The detention remains in effect. This is a critical moment of asymmetry. The agent understands the legal consequences of unlawful detention. He has worked cases where improper stops resulted in suppressed evidence, internal discipline, or civil liability. The officer, however, continues forward as if the encounter has already passed the point of no return. From the outside, the scene remains subdued. Cafe patrons glance over, but no one intervenes. There is no physical struggle. The authority on display is procedural rather than violent. The legitimacy gap continues to widen. The agent references his rights without reciting them. He does not threaten legal action. He does not argue policy. He simply maintains his position that, absent a lawful basis, he cannot be compelled to leave a public space. According to the footage, the officer responds by reinforcing control rather than clarifying law. The word detained is repeated. Backup is mentioned. Time passes. In legal terms, duration matters. A detention that extends without new information or justification becomes harder to defend. Each additional minute compounds the exposure. The camera captures those minutes in silence, broken only by short exchanges. This is no longer a misunderstanding. It is a test of legitimacy. The agent's conduct remains consistent, calm, non-threatening, legally precise. The officer's conduct also remains consistent, directive, insistent, procedurally rigid. Neither escalates physically, but the legal stakes continue to rise. By the time supervisors will later review this footage, the central question will not be about tone or attitude. It will be about authority. Who had it, who exceeded it, and when the opportunity to disengage was missed. At the cafe, none of that analysis has occurred yet. The officer believes control is being maintained. The agent understands that the record is being created. The body cam continues to record, capturing not just what is said, but what is not. The officer's behavior at the cafe does not occur in a vacuum. By the time the body cam footage is reviewed, internal investigators will not examine this encounter as an isolated misunderstanding. They will situate it within departmental norms, training standards, supervision practices, and the informal culture that governs how officers respond when their authority is questioned. According to publicly available law enforcement training guidelines, officers are instructed to clearly distinguish between consensual encounters and detentions. The distinction is not semantic. It determines whether a citizen or, in this case, another law enforcement officer has the legal right to refuse a command. The footage suggests that this line was either misunderstood or disregarded. The officer on scene does not appear panicked. His voice remains even. His posture is controlled. There is no sign of an immediate threat. This matters because it removes the most common justifications for rapid escalation. There is no claim of officer safety risk, no allegation of disruptive behavior, no report of a crime in progress. The cafe remains quiet. Instead, the interaction reflects a different pattern, one familiar in civil rights litigation. When an initial command is met with resistance, even lawful resistance, some officers interpret noncompliance itself as a challenge to authority. The response becomes less about enforcing a specific law and more about reasserting control. Department policies often warn against this exact progression. Training materials emphasize de-escalation, reassessment, and disengagement when legal grounds are uncertain. Supervisors are instructed to intervene early when an encounter begins to drift from its lawful basis. Yet, according to the footage, no supervisor arrives before the detention solidifies. The officer references procedure without articulating law. He invokes his role rather than a statute. Each time the agent asks for clarification, the response circles back to the same directive: leave the cafe. This is not accidental. In many departments, officers are conditioned to believe that decisiveness equals control. Backing down can be perceived internally as weakness, even when it is legally appropriate. The body cam captures the consequences of that mindset. The department's broader context will later become relevant. Investigators will examine whether officers are trained to recognize when a situation no longer supports detention. They will look at prior complaints, if any exist. They will assess whether supervisors reinforce lawful disengagement or reward command presence above all else. At the cafe, none of this is explicit. The officer is acting within what he appears to believe are acceptable boundaries. He does not consult a supervisor. He does not pause the encounter. He continues forward, narrowing his options with each decision. This is another missed opportunity to stop. The agent's status as a federal officer introduces an additional layer of complexity. Interagency encounters are not uncommon, and departments often have protocols for handling them. According to the footage, no such protocol is invoked. The officer does not request verification through dispatch. He does not adjust his approach. He treats the identification as irrelevant to the immediate command. From a departmental perspective, this choice will later matter. Policies typically emphasize verification over confrontation. A simple radio call could have resolved the situation. The camera shows that call is never made. As time passes, the legal exposure grows. A detention unsupported by reasonable suspicion is one issue. A prolonged detention after identification as a federal agent compounds it. Each minute recorded strengthens the evidentiary record. The officer remains committed to his initial assessment. The department, through him, remains committed as well. There is no visible mechanism for correction at the scene. When Internal Affairs later reviews the footage, the focus will not be on whether the officer intended harm. Intent is difficult to prove and often legally irrelevant. The focus will be on decisions: when they were made, what alternatives existed, and why they were not taken. The body cam documents those decisions in real time. By the end of this phase of the encounter, the cafe is no longer just a public space. It has become a controlled environment governed by an assertion of authority that has not been legally justified on camera. The officer has crossed from command to commitment. What follows will not be resolved by explanation alone. The record has already been created. By the time the encounter reaches this stage, the legal trajectory has already narrowed. What began as a directive to leave a cafe has solidified into a detention that now must be justified retroactively. The body cam continues to record, capturing not only what happens, but the absence of corrective action. The officer shifts his stance slightly closer to the table. According to the footage, his voice remains calm, but the language hardens. The command is no longer framed as a request. It is presented as a requirement. This is another decision point. At this moment, there is still an exit. The officer could clarify the basis for the detention. He could disengage. He could verify the agent's identity. None of those steps are taken. Instead, the officer reiterates that the agent must leave and that refusal constitutes noncompliance. The justification has inverted. Compliance is now treated as the legal predicate, rather than the result of lawful authority. This inversion matters. The agent remains seated. His posture does not change. His hands stay visible. He asks again, calmly, whether he is being detained and under what authority. The question is precise. It forces a constitutional threshold. The officer answers by repeating the detention. No statute is cited. No specific conduct is identified. The decision to proceed has been made. This was another chance to stop. He didn't. As the exchange continues, the surrounding environment subtly shifts. The cafe noise fades into the background. Conversations pause. Chairs no longer move. The body cam captures a space that has become still, not because of fear, but because authority has asserted itself without explanation. Backup is mentioned. The implication is clear. The situation will escalate administratively, not because of new facts, but because the initial command was challenged. The detention lengthens. Duration now becomes a central issue. Courts have repeatedly held that even brief detentions require reasonable suspicion. As time accumulates without justification, the detention becomes increasingly difficult to defend. The footage shows minutes passing with no new information introduced. The agent identifies himself again. The statement is not confrontational. It is factual. According to the audio, he explains that he is a federal law enforcement officer and that he is lawfully present. This is not a threat. It is an attempt to reset the legal frame. The officer does not reset. He does not request credentials. He does not call dispatch. He does not contact a supervisor. Each omission is another decision point, narrowing the path back to lawful disengagement. This was another chance to stop. He didn't. The encounter now operates on momentum. The officer's authority is sustained by repetition rather than law. The agent's legitimacy is sustained by restraint rather than assertion. The imbalance is visible on camera. At one point, the officer steps slightly to block the agent's path, despite the agent not attempting to leave. This physical positioning reinforces the detention without adding legal basis. The camera captures the movement clearly. No one raises their voice. No force is used. The escalation is procedural, not physical. That distinction will later matter because it removes claims of chaos or necessity. The footage is orderly. The escalation is deliberate. As the minutes continue, the officer references policy without naming it. He refers to how this works. The agent asks for the law. The difference between those two concepts is the core of what will later be litigated. This was another chance to stop. He didn't. By the end of the escalation phase, the detention is no longer ambiguous. The agent is not free to leave. The officer has asserted control over a lawful activity in a public space without articulating a crime. The camera records the final consolidation of authority. There is a brief pause. No one speaks. The ambient sound of the cafe returns faintly. The posture of both men remains unchanged, but the balance of power has shifted. The officer's authority now rests entirely on the fact that it has already been exercised. This is the moment the footage will later be replayed in silence. No analysis is offered. No justification is added. The camera records a stillness that marks the point of no return. The footage does not end with a dramatic conclusion. There is no sudden arrest, no physical confrontation, no raised voices. What it captures instead is something more consequential. A complete evidentiary record of a detention that never finds its legal footing. When the encounter finally concludes, the Bodycam file is logged, time-stamped, and uploaded like thousands of others. At that point, it is just data. Its significance emerges later, during review. According to standard departmental procedure, incidents involving prolonged detentions in public spaces are subject to supervisory examination. The cafe footage is reviewed first by a line supervisor. The focus is narrow: duration, articulation of reasonable suspicion, and adherence to policy. The questions are basic, but difficult to answer from the recording. Where was the crime? When was it identified? What facts supported continued detention? The footage provides no clear answers. Investigators slow the video down. They isolate the audio. They map the timeline. From the initial directive to leave, through repeated assertions of detention, minutes pass without the introduction of new information. The agent's identification as a federal officer is noted, but more importantly, the absence of verification is documented. Internal review then expands. According to official process, Internal Affairs examines whether the officer had lawful authority to issue the initial command. The cafe is a public accommodation. No disturbance call appears in the record. No manager request to remove a patron is documented in the footage. The justification rests entirely on officer discretion. That discretion is tested against policy. Investigators compare the officer's actions to training materials on consensual encounters and detentions. The gap is visible. At no point does the officer clearly communicate that the agent is free to leave. At multiple points, he explicitly states the opposite. The legal threshold is crossed early and never recalibrated. The body cam becomes central evidence. According to internal memoranda later referenced in public filings, the footage is reviewed alongside department policy and constitutional standards. The question is not whether the officer acted aggressively, it is whether he acted lawfully. On that point, the video is unambiguous in what it does not show. No reasonable suspicion is articulated. As the review progresses, the footage is shared beyond the department. City attorneys request copies. Risk management analysts examine exposure. They calculate potential liability based on duration, lack of justification, and the professional standing of the individual detained. At this stage, the agent's identity matters less than the clarity of the record. Civil rights litigation often turns on ambiguity. This case does not present much of it. The camera shows a calm individual, lawfully present, repeatedly asking for legal grounds. It shows an officer repeatedly asserting detention without providing them. There is no competing narrative. There is no missing angle. This is the moment when silence in the video becomes evidence. No officer commentary explains the basis for the stop. No supervisor arrives to correct course. The footage ends with authority exercised and never justified. According to later filings, investigators conclude that the detention cannot be supported under department policy or constitutional standards. That conclusion does not require speculation. It follows directly from the recording. The agent's attorneys receive the footage through formal channels. They do not need to add context. They do not need witness statements to establish demeanor. The video already does that. The investigation phase does not resolve the matter. It clarifies it. By the time the case moves toward legal action, the evidence is fixed. The camera has done its work. The remaining question is not what happened, but how much it will cost. Once the investigation phase concludes, the matter shifts from internal review to formal legal exposure. The transition is procedural, not dramatic. There is no press conference, no public statement assigning blame. According to official records, the case moves quietly into the hands of city attorneys and external counsel. The Bodycam footage is now an exhibit. From a legal standpoint, the claims are straightforward. An unlawful detention in a public place implicates the Fourth Amendment. The duration of the stop, the absence of articulated reasonable suspicion, and the failure to disengage after identification all narrow the city's defenses. Qualified immunity, often invoked in such cases, becomes difficult to sustain when the violation is clearly established in precedent and documented on video. Attorneys review the timeline frame by frame. They note each decision point, each moment where the officer could have clarified, verified, or disengaged and did not. The accumulation matters. Courts evaluate not just the initiation of a stop, but its continuation. In this case, continuation is the dominant feature. The agent files a civil rights lawsuit. According to court documents, the complaint does not rely on emotional harm or reputational damage. It relies on the footage. The legal theory is narrow. Detention without lawful basis, prolonged beyond any permissible scope, captured in full. The city evaluates its options. Proceeding to trial carries risk. Juries respond strongly to clear video evidence, particularly when it shows restraint on one side and unsupported authority on the other. Motions to dismiss face the same problem. The record is complete, and it does not favor the defense. Settlement discussions begin. According to later disclosures, negotiators focus on exposure rather than intent. Whether the officer believed he was acting properly is not central. What matters is what a reasonable officer should have known, and what the camera shows was done instead. The number attached to the case emerges during this phase. It is not arbitrary. It reflects compensatory damages, legal fees, and risk assessment. The figure accounts for the clarity of the evidence and the likelihood of an adverse verdict. The payout reaches $3.9 million. The settlement resolves a civil claim. It does not include an admission of wrongdoing, as is standard in such agreements. It does, however, close the case in a way that acknowledges the strength of the evidence. The city pays to avoid trial. The footage remains part of the public record. For the officer, the consequences are administrative rather than criminal. According to official statements later referenced in filings, disciplinary action is reviewed internally. The details of that process are not publicly disclosed in official records. What is clear is that the encounter becomes a reference point in training and policy discussions. The settlement also triggers secondary review. Departments track payouts of this magnitude. Risk management flags the incident. Policies governing detentions and public accommodations are re-examined. Supervisory oversight protocols are revisited. None of this is announced at the Café. None of it is visible on the Bodycam. The legal consequences unfold months later, in offices far removed from the original scene. The agent returns to his career. The city absorbs the cost. The officer's actions are reduced to minutes of footage and lines in a settlement agreement. The law does not frame this outcome as punishment. It frames it as liability. The footage made the violation measurable. The settlement made it final. After the settlement is finalized, the case does not disappear. It changes function. Within the department, the footage is no longer evidence in a dispute. It becomes material. Training units receive copies. Supervisors reference the timeline. Legal advisors annotate the moments where authority was asserted without foundation. The Café encounter is dissected not for spectacle, but for instruction. Policy reviews follow a predictable pattern. Detentions and public accommodations receive renewed scrutiny. Officers are reminded formally that refusal to comply is not itself a crime. That distinction, often understood in theory, is reinforced with practical consequence. The footage demonstrates what happens when that line is ignored. Oversight bodies note the settlement amount. Payouts of this scale are tracked. They influence insurance assessments, budget planning, and risk management protocols. The number attached to the case ensures that it is cited internally, even if names and details are later redacted in summaries. The language used in post-incident reviews is restrained. According to official summaries, the focus is on process rather than blame. Training deficiencies are identified. Supervisory intervention timelines are adjusted. The emphasis is placed on early disengagement when legal grounds are unclear. The footage becomes part of a broader pattern. It is referenced alongside other cases where authority was exercised first and justified later. In each instance, the common thread is not hostility or chaos, but certainty. Certainty that command alone was sufficient. That certainty is what the camera undermined. For the public, the case enters the archive of recorded encounters that quietly reshape expectations. There is no viral confrontation at the end, no dramatic reversal on screen. The outcome is documented in court records and budget line items. Its impact is institutional rather than emotional. The officer involved continues under revised scrutiny. The department continues under revised policy. The city continues under revised risk tolerance. None of these changes are visible in isolation. Together, they represent the afterimage of the footage. The agent's role in this phase is minimal. He does not need to advocate for reform. The record already has. His restraint on camera, coupled with the absence of lawful justification, made the outcome difficult to dispute. In legal terms, the case reinforces a simple principle. Authority exercised without basis becomes liability when preserved on video. The settlement did not create that rule. It confirmed it. The cafe returns to normal. New patrons sit at the same tables. Conversations resume. The space forgets the encounter. The system does not.